Hey everyone, welcome back. Tyria. Sorry. In honor of spooky season, I'm going to start this video off a little bit differently, with a quote from the 1953 film The War of the Worlds. The Martians had no resistance to the bacteria in our atmosphere to which we have long since become immune. Once they had breathed our air, germs which no longer affect us began to kill them. The end came swiftly. All over the world, their machines began to stop and fall. After all that men could do had failed, the Martians were destroyed, and humanity was saved by the littlest things which God in His wisdom had put upon this earth. Aside from simply being an epic story about an alien invasion, The War of the Worlds provides a really interesting perspective on the important role that bacteria plays on our planet. Not necessarily just as it relates to giving E.T. the sniffles, but on a broader scale as essential members of the Earth's ecosystems. Our relationship with bacteria is complicated. Most people hear the word bacteria and their first response is to stop talking to me and go wash their hands. But please hear me out. As human beings, we have a tendency to be most afraid of that which is least like us. And as we learned in our last video, bacteria are our most distant cousins, branching off from our common ancestor about 3.5 billion years ago. It doesn't get much more distant than that. On top of that, bacteria are so microscopic that the only evidence the average person sees of them are the symptoms that they feel when they become sick. So it's only natural that there's a negative perception of these simple little creatures. But bacteria aren't all bad, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you why they're probably the most important organisms on our planet. Let's start with the fact that bacteria were the first known living things on Earth. You might think that this makes them primitive or somehow less successful than other organisms, but the truth is, bacteria have pretty much perfected the whole existence thing. This is to be expected, given the fact that they've had 3.5 billion years of practice. In that time, they've evolved and diversified to fill almost every ecological niche imaginable. They're found in every drop of water, every ounce of soil, and even inside the bodies of humans and other animals. So bacteria be chillin' everywhere. So what? Well, let me ask you this. Do you enjoy breathing? Does filling your lungs with air make you happy? Are you currently, as we speak at this very moment, inhaling oxygen into your lungs and carrying it through your bloodstream to all the important parts of your body so that you don't die? If you answered yes to any of these questions, thank these guys. Cyanobacteria. These green little squiggly boys are the reason that life on Earth has been able to thrive and diversify in such an oxygen-rich atmosphere. You see, 2.4 billion years ago, cyanobacteria became the first organisms to utilize sunlight and CO2 to generate energy and release oxygen as a byproduct. The first organisms to use photosynthesis. We usually think about plants when discussing photosynthesis, but cyanobacteria were hard at work building an animal-friendly atmosphere over 2 billion years before the first plants had even evolved. Because of this, cyanobacteria are often referred to as the architects of our breathable atmosphere. By the way, it's important to remember that cyanobacteria didn't develop photosynthesis because it knew that animals would one day need oxygen to exist. Animals and other organisms evolved to utilize the abundance of oxygen that was being created by cyanobacteria as a waste product. So breathing, check. Thank you, bacteria. But our lungs aren't the only body parts that benefit from the beautiful bounty of our bacterial buddies. You share your body with about 39 trillion microbes, including fungi, viruses, and of course, bacteria. Your body itself is made of roughly 30 trillion human cells. This means that there are more non-human cells in your body than human cells. 39 trillion to 30 trillion. But because these microbes are so tiny, they only make up about 1 to 3% of your total mass. Not only do these beneficial gut bacteria help you digest and break down food, they also produce lactic acid and hydrogen peroxide, which makes it much more difficult for pathogens like bad bacteria to infect your body. The bacteria that live in and on you are there to keep you alive and healthy. I have one more example of how wonderful bacteria is, but it requires a quick chemistry lesson. Nitrogen. Although it doesn't get nearly as much love in the mainstream media as oxygen or carbon, nitrogen plays an equally important role in maintaining the balance of life on Earth. And luckily there is no shortage of nitrogen in our atmosphere. By volume, the air that circulates through our planet is made up of 0.033% carbon dioxide, 0.93% argon, 20.95% oxygen, and a whopping 78.09% nitrogen. Plant life, including crops that we rely on for food every day, require nitrogen in order to survive and grow. The problem is that all that nitrogen in the air can't be used by plants until it's converted into a form that they can absorb through their roots. Luckily, bacteria in the soil are able to fix nitrogen in the air into a soluble form that plants can use in a process called nitrogen fixation. I'll leave a link in the comments section to a video that describes the nitrogen cycle in much better detail than I could. Chemistry is amazing and fascinating, but I'm much more comfortable talking about things like lizards and bugs and plants and Star Wars. Now, of course, not all bacteria is good for us. The bacteria that cause sickness in humans only make up a teeny tiny little baby fraction of the total number of bacteria worldwide. But for the sake of clickbait, I'll give these bad boy bacteria a moment of our time. Bacteria that make us sick are called pathogenic bacteria. Pathogens cause infection by entering a host body and multiplying. What makes us sick and causes disease is when our cells become damaged as a result of the infection. Most commonly, this cellular damage isn't what makes us feel sick. It's actually our immune system responding to the infection and attempting to eliminate it. I'll share some personal experience to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. Last summer, while frolicking around in the New Hampshire wilderness, a deer tick put its mouth inside my skin and stole my blood without permission. This deer tick happened to be carrying with it a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi. When Borrelia burgdorferi entered my bloodstream, it made itself right at home and began to multiply. As this happened, the bacteria expressed proteins that interacted with some of the cells in my body, especially the cells that make up my circulatory and nervous systems. Over a period of a few weeks, my immune system noticed that something was off and initiated an inflammatory response in an attempt to kill off the pathogen. It was only around this point that I started to feel like I was dying. I had the worst headaches and joint pain in my life. I couldn't sleep even though I was exhausted. I threw up more than I ate, and I cried somewhat profusely. At this point, I went to the doctor and tested positive for Lyme disease. I was prescribed antibiotics and was all better in just over a week. But here's the strange part. My doctor recommended that I take probiotics along with the antibiotics. That way, the antibiotics that I was taking wouldn't have an overly negative effect on the beneficial bacteria living in my digestive system. So while I was trying to eliminate the bad bacteria in my body, I had to make sure that the good bacteria was protected. I tell you this story partially because I like attention, but mostly because it shows just how complicated our relationship with bacteria really is. Bacteria doesn't just exist to either destroy or serve multicellular life. More often than not, it's just doing its own thing, absorbing nutrients and creating byproducts that other organisms can either be aided or harmed by. You don't have to love bacteria, but in my humble opinion, you should be very, very grateful that they exist, especially when the Martians invade. Next week, we're going to take a look at the domain of life that's just as widespread and almost as ancient as bacteria, but wasn't discovered until 1977. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and never stop evolving.